A stray dog sat beside the girl's coffin during her funeral. What happened next will shock you. The small town of Willow Creek had never seen anything like it. As mourners gathered inside the church to say their final goodbyes to 10-year-old Lily Thompson, a stray dog quietly padded in and sat beside her white coffin. No one knew where the dog had come from, but it remained still, ears drooped, eyes sorrowful, as if mourning alongside the family. Some guests tried to shoo it away, but the dog refused to budge. Strangely, when Lily was alive, she had always spoken of a stray dog she played with in the park, though her parents never saw it. Was this the same one? As the service continued, Lily's mother, Emily, was overcome with grief. Her little girl had tragically passed away from an illness, leaving an unbearable void. The dog, sensing Emily's pain, slowly walked up to her and placed its head on her lap. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Emily, though initially hesitant, felt a strange sense of warmth and comfort from the dog's touch. The pastor continued with the final prayers, but a soft whimper from the dog interrupted the silence. Suddenly, it stood up, wagging its tail, and let out a low bark, as if trying to say something. Just then, Lily's younger brother, Tommy, who had been silent throughout the service, suddenly shouted, "That's Lily's dog. She always talked about him." The room fell silent. How could this be? No one had ever seen this dog before. Emily looked at the dog again, this time with curiosity rather than sorrow. It was as if the animal had come to deliver a message. As if in response, the dog ran towards the entrance, barked once more, and then stood by the door, looking back at Emily expectantly. Though hesitant, she followed. The dog led her to the very park where Lily used to play. What happened next left Emily in tears. The dog stopped at a tree, pawing at the ground. Emily knelt and, beneath the fallen leaves, found a small, buried wooden box. Inside, there were drawings, notes, and little trinkets, Lily's secret treasures. Among them was a letter addressed to her mother. With shaking hands, Emily opened it. "Dear Mommy," it read, "if you ever find this, just know that I love you so much. If I ever have to leave, don't be sad. I'll always be with you." Overcome with emotion, Emily clutched the note to her chest as the dog sat beside her, offering silent companionship. It was no stray, it was Lily's guardian, bringing one final message of love. Emily wiped her tears as she held the letter close, feeling Lily's presence in the words. The dog nudged her hand gently, as if urging her to read on. Among the little trinkets and sketches was another note, slightly crumpled and marked with tiny fingerprints. Emily unfolded it carefully. "Mommy, if you ever feel sad, just follow my little friend. He knows where to go," the note read. Her breath hitched. The dog, Lily's secret companion, wasn't just here by chance. It had a purpose. The dog wagged its tail and trotted ahead, stopping every few steps to make sure Emily was following. Hesitant but compelled by something deep inside her, she walked behind it. The path led past the swings where Lily once played, past the oak tree where she loved to read, and finally, to a small wooden bench by the river. Emily's heart clenched. This was where Lily had spent countless afternoons, feeding the ducks and telling stories to her unseen friend, the same dog now standing beside her. As Emily sat down, the dog jumped onto the bench, curling up beside her. The river's gentle flow mirrored the emotions surging within her. Then, something caught her eye, a faint engraving on the wood. She traced her fingers over the letters, realizing they spelled out, "Mommy, always look for the light." Lily had carved it here, perhaps on one of those quiet afternoons, long before Emily knew how much those words would mean. At that moment, something inside her shifted. The grief, though still heavy, felt lighter with the presence of this loyal creature, with the messages her daughter had left behind. Emily looked down at the dog, who gazed back at her with unwavering loyalty. Maybe Lily wasn't truly gone. Maybe, in some way, she was still here, guiding, loving, watching over her family. The dog let out a soft whimper and rested its head on Emily's lap. She gently stroked its fur, her fingers tracing the warmth of the only living connection to Lily left behind. A strange sense of peace washed over her, as though the little girl's spirit lingered in the wind, in the rustling trees, and in the loyal heart of this stray that wasn't so stray after all. A light drizzle began to fall, the raindrops mixing with Emily's silent tears. She sighed, standing up slowly, the small wooden box still clutched in her hands. The dog stood too, shaking off the water and looking up at her expectantly. It was clear the journey wasn't over. There was still something more it wanted to show her. The dog led her down a narrow path through the woods, one Emily hadn't noticed before. She hesitated for a moment, but something deep inside told her to trust. As she walked, she realized the path was familiar. It was the same way Lily used to go when she wandered off to play, the same route that led to an old abandoned cabin deep in the trees. A place Emily had warned her daughter to stay away from. When they finally reached the cabin, Emily's heart pounded. The wooden door was slightly ajar, as though it had been waiting for someone to return. The dog barked once, then ran inside. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped in after it. The air smelled of damp wood and forgotten memories, but something else lingered, something unexplainable. On a dusty table in the center of the room lay a framed picture of Lily, one Emily had never seen before. In the photo, Lily stood beside the very same dog, her arms wrapped around its neck, smiling as if she had the whole world in her hands. Emily's breath caught. Who had taken this picture? And why was it here, waiting for her? Emily's hands trembled as she picked up the framed picture, her mind racing with questions. The photograph was old, the edges slightly worn, but Lily's smile was as bright as ever. The dog sat beside her in the image, just as it did now, watching Emily with those same soulful eyes. But what sent a chill down her spine was the background of the photo. It wasn't just any place. It was this very cabin. Her heart pounded. Had Lily been coming here all along? If so, why had she never mentioned it? Emily turned the frame over, hoping for a clue. Faded ink marked the back, written in a child's uneven handwriting. For Mommy, so you know I was never alone. A sob escaped her lips. Lily had wanted her to find this. To understand something Emily had missed. The dog suddenly perked up, ears twitching. It trotted to the corner of the cabin, where an old wooden chest sat, covered in dust. With a soft whine, it pawed at the lid. Emily hesitated before kneeling down and brushing off the dust. Her fingers found the latch, and with a creak, she lifted the lid. Inside were more of Lily's belongings, tiny notebooks filled with drawings, crayon-colored pages of the dog beside her, and little messages that made Emily's throat tighten. Mommy, he keeps me safe. He listens when I talk. He's my best friend. Page after page, Lily had written about the mysterious stray, as if he had been watching over her for years. But then, at the very bottom of the chest, Emily found something that made her blood run cold. A second photograph. One that shouldn't exist. It was almost identical to the first, Lily, standing beside the dog in front of the cabin. But in this one, there was someone else. A shadowy figure in the background, barely visible but unmistakably there. Someone had been watching Lily. Someone had been here all along. Emily's breath hitched as she stared at the photograph. A chill ran down her spine. The figure in the background was blurred, barely distinguishable, but its presence was undeniable. Someone had been near Lily while she played here, someone Emily had never known about. The dog let out a low growl, its body tense as it stood protectively in front of the chest. It was as if the creature, so calm and gentle before, sensed something Emily could not. She looked around the dimly lit cabin, suddenly hyper-aware of the creaking walls, the way the wind whistled through the cracks. Had someone been here recently? Was someone still watching? Swallowing her fear, she reached into the chest again and pulled out another piece of paper. It was folded neatly, smaller than the rest. As she opened it, her heart pounded harder. The handwriting wasn't Lily's. You were never supposed to find this. Emily's fingers trembled. The words were scrawled in hurried strokes, as if written in urgency. She looked down at the dog, whose hackles were raised, eyes locked on the doorway. A sudden gust of wind slammed the cabin door shut, making Emily jump. Panic surged through her. She wasn't alone. Someone was out there. And they had been waiting. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as she clutched the note, her eyes darting around the cabin. The dog's growl deepened, its stance protective. It wasn't just a warning, something was near. The floor creaked behind her. Emily spun around, her breath hitching. The door was still shut, but the shadows in the room seemed to shift, stretching unnaturally in the dim light. The dog barked sharply, its gaze locked onto a darkened corner. Slowly, Emily followed its eyes and froze. There, half hidden in the gloom, was a figure. At first, it was motionless, blending into the old wooden walls. Then, as if realizing it had been seen, it took a slow step forward. A man. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his presence sent a bolt of terror through Emily. He had been here, watching. Maybe even waiting for Lily before Emily ever knew this place existed. Her grip on the photograph tightened. "Who are you?" she demanded, forcing her voice to stay steady. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket. Emily's breath caught. Was he pulling out a weapon? A phone? A clue? The dog lunged forward, teeth bared. The man hesitated. Then, without a word, he turned and bolted through the back door, disappearing into the forest. Emily gasped, her body shaking. She wanted to chase him, to demand answers, but fear and instinct told her to stay put. The dog stood at the door, barking after him, then turned to Emily as if waiting for her next move. Who was he? Why had Lily come here? And what had she uncovered before she died? One thing was certain, this wasn't over. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the photograph. Her breath came in short, shaky gasps, her mind racing with questions. Who was that man? What had he wanted? And why had Lily, her sweet, innocent little girl, been tangled up in this mystery? The dog paced near the door, ears alert, as if waiting for Emily to make a decision. She hesitated. Should she chase after the stranger? Call the police? Or was there more to uncover here first? Her eyes fell back to the chest. If Lily had left behind these notes and drawings, maybe there was something else, something that could explain why she had been visiting this abandoned cabin. With renewed urgency, Emily rummaged through the box, her fingers brushing against something cold and metallic at the bottom. A key. It was old, rusted, and attached to a thin leather cord. She lifted it slowly, examining it under the dim light. What did it unlock? A sharp bark from the dog made her jump. It stood beside a wooden panel on the floor, paws scraping against the worn planks. Emily's breath caught. A hidden compartment. Swallowing hard, she knelt down and ran her fingers over the wood, feeling for a gap. Her heart pounded as she slipped the key into a barely visible keyhole and turned with a soft click. The panel lifted, revealing a small, locked metal box. Dust covered its surface, but a single word had been scratched into the lid. Emily's vision blurred with fresh tears as she read it. Lily. Her daughter had hidden this here. But why? And what secrets lay inside? Emily's hands shook as she reached for the latch, unaware that outside, beyond the trees, the man was still watching. Waiting. Emily hesitated, her fingers hovering over the latch of the metal box. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the wind rustling through the trees outside. The dog remained tense beside her, its ears twitching as if sensing something unseen. She took a deep breath and flipped the latch open. The lid creaked as she lifted it, revealing a small stack of papers, a tiny silver locket, and her breath caught a cassette tape. Her hands shook as she picked up the locket. Inside was a picture of Lily as a baby, one Emily had never seen before. On the opposite side was a photograph of a man. Not her husband. Not anyone she recognized. A chill ran down her spine. She turned her attention to the cassette. It was old, the label smudged but still readable. In Lily's uneven handwriting, 3 words stood out, "For Mommy. Listen." Emily swallowed hard. She had no cassette player, but she knew she had to find one. Lily had left this for her. There was something she needed to hear. But before she could process it further, the dog let out a deep, guttural growl. Emily's head snapped up just as she heard it, footsteps outside the cabin. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was coming. And they weren't trying to hide it anymore. Emily's breath hitched. The footsteps outside grew louder, crunching over dead leaves, deliberate and slow. She clutched the cassette and locket tightly, her pulse racing. The dog stood rigid beside her, its growl deepening into a warning snarl. The cabin was small, there were no back exits, no windows big enough to crawl through. Whoever was outside had her trapped. Her mind screamed for her to move, to hide, but her body remained frozen. Then, a shadow crossed the window. A sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Emily jumped. The dog barked furiously, its stance protective. Another knock followed, this time firmer. Then a voice, low and unfamiliar. "I know you're in there." Emily's stomach twisted. The voice wasn't threatening, but it carried a strange familiarity, like a ghost of a memory she couldn't place. The dog barked again, stepping between her and the door. Emily's mind raced. She had two choices: open the door and face whoever was outside, or find another way out before it was too late. But before she could decide, the doorknob slowly began to turn. The doorknob clicked, turning ever so slowly, the sound echoing in the small cabin like a death knell. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The dog growled fiercely, its body tense, every muscle coiled in readiness. It was as if the creature understood that whatever was on the other side of that door was no ordinary visitor. Emily's mind raced. There was no way out. She had to face whoever was coming. She stepped back, clutching the cassette and the locket, her fingers numb. The door creaked open just a few inches, revealing a figure standing in the doorway, tall, cloaked in a dark jacket, their face shadowed. For a moment, neither moved. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The dog barked once more, louder this time, but the figure didn't flinch. "You don't remember me, do you?" The voice was calm but laced with something unsettling. A hint of recognition flickered in Emily's chest. Before she could answer, the figure stepped fully into the cabin, and the door slammed shut behind them. The room felt colder. The air thickened with tension. "I'm here because of her." The figure's eyes locked on the dog, and then, almost as an afterthought, they turned to Emily. "I've been waiting for you to find the truth." Emily's mind spun. Waiting. Truth. Who was this person, and what did they know? The figure took a step forward, and in that moment, the dog leapt, lunging at them with a speed that caught Emily by surprise. But the figure didn't flinch. Instead, with unnatural calm, they extended their hand, stopping the dog mid-air with a single touch. Emily gasped. The dog froze, eyes wide in confusion and fear, its growl fading into silence. "Not everything is as it seems, Emily," the figure said softly, almost pityingly. "Your daughter knew things you couldn't understand. But now, it's your turn." Emily's body went cold. The figure's words hung in the air, like a chilling breeze that wouldn't leave. Emily's legs felt like jelly, but she stood her ground, her mind racing. Things she couldn't understand. What did that even mean? The dog, which had always been her source of comfort, now stood motionless, almost hypnotized by the stranger's calm presence. It was as if the dog had been disarmed, paralyzed by some unseen force. The figure took another step closer, and Emily instinctively stepped back, clutching the locket and the cassette tighter against her chest. Her eyes never left the stranger's face, trying to make out any familiar detail in the shadows. "Who was this person? You don't remember, do you?" the figure repeated, a trace of sadness in their voice. "It's not your fault. Lily was special. She saw the world differently." Emily's breath hitched. "What do you mean? What do you know about my daughter?" She felt an almost desperate need to understand, to grasp any fragment of explanation. Her hands shook as she raised them slightly, as if to steady herself. The figure slowly removed the hood of their jacket, revealing a face that was, shockingly, unfamiliar. But something in their eyes, something familiar, struck Emily with a sudden, visceral recognition. The man smiled faintly. "I was there before. I was the one who showed her this place, helped her unlock things. But she was always meant to carry this burden. Now it's your turn." Emily recoiled, the air thick with the weight of his words. "What burden? What are you talking about?" He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded toward the cassette. "Everything you need to know is there. But you'll have to listen closely. It's not just a story, it's the truth. The truth you've been blind to all these years." Emily's mind buzzed, fighting the urge to run. Listen closely. What could she possibly hear on that cassette that would explain all of this? Lily, her sweet, innocent Lily had known something beyond her years. But what was it? The man stepped back, allowing her space to breathe. You have a choice, Emily. You can ignore it and continue living in the dark. Or you can uncover the truth and face what it means. Emily's eyes fell to the cassette in her hands, the weight of its mystery pulling her in. There was no turning back now. She had to know. She had to understand. The answer was right there, and she could feel it tugging at her soul. "I'll listen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Good. The truth isn't easy, but it will set you free." And with that, the figure turned and walked out of the cabin, leaving Emily standing in the quiet darkness, the dog slowly lowering its guard. Emily took one last look at the door, the sound of the man's footsteps fading away, before her gaze fixed once again on the cassette. With a trembling hand, she reached for her daughter's secret. As Emily placed the cassette into a nearby old player she had found hidden in the cabin, a strange stillness enveloped the room. The dog, now back to its usual calm self, lay quietly at her feet, almost as though it too was waiting for what was about to unfold. The cassette clicked and whirred, the faint crackling sound of static filling the air before the voice began, soft, clear, and unmistakably Lily's. "Mommy. I hope you find this." Lily's voice echoed from the speakers, her tone sweet but laced with an unfamiliar heaviness. Emily's heart clenched at the sound of her daughter's voice, so young, so full of innocence. "I've been keeping a secret," Lily continued, her words slower now, like she was carefully choosing them. "There are things you don't understand. Things I didn't know how to tell you. But now, I think you have to know. You have to understand before it's too late." Emily's pulse quickened. Her eyes glued to the cassette player, she leaned forward, her hands trembling. She had always wondered what Lily had been hiding, why she had spoken of the dog so much, why she had seemed so unusually calm, even wise for her age. But this was more than she could have ever imagined. Lily's voice continued. "There's a secret place, and it's not just in the woods. It's in your mind too. The man who's coming after you, he's not who he says he is. He's been waiting for you to find him. He wants something from you, but you can't give it to him. Don't trust him. He's been watching, and he's been planning, for a long time." Emily froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The man? The one who had been in the cabin? She glanced at the door, as if he might return at any moment. But no, there was something more to this. Lily had known. She had known all along. "I know this is hard, Mommy, but I've always been with you. And when I'm gone, it's up to you to stop him. He's coming to finish what he started. But you'll know what to do. You'll understand when you find the last piece." The recording paused, the silence deafening. Emily's heart raced as she processed the words. The last piece. What was Lily talking about? Suddenly, the cassette player whirred again, and a different voice came through. "Emily, it's time you knew the truth." The voice was not Lily's. It was the same man who had stood before her earlier, and the chill in his tone was enough to send a shiver through her. "You're too late. You've heard what she said, but it's not the whole story. If you want to stop me, come find me. But be careful, because you'll be walking right into a trap." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in the room. Emily sat there, stunned. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a call to action. A call to confront everything she had feared, everything she had tried to ignore. The man wasn't finished. And Lily, her daughter's words still echoed in Emily's mind. "You'll understand when you find the last piece." With renewed determination, Emily knew she had no choice but to face what lay ahead. The dog, as if sensing her resolve, stood and walked to her side. She looked down at the loyal creature, the only one who had been with Lily through all of this. Together, they would find the truth. And whatever came next, Emily was ready. As the sound of the recording faded into the eerie silence of the cabin, Emily's mind raced. The man's warning was clear. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was a fight for survival. The last piece. Whatever it was, it would be the key to everything. But what could it be? And where could she find it? She glanced at the dog, still standing guard, its watchful eyes locked on the door. The unspoken bond between them grew stronger in that moment, as though they both understood what was at stake. The dog had always been there for Lily, and now, it would help Emily. Emily took a deep breath, clutching the locket and cassette tighter in her hands. She was no longer just following clues left behind by her daughter. She was on her own path now, ready to face whatever lay ahead. With one final look around the cabin, Emily turned toward the door. It was time to find the last piece and put an end to this. Whatever it took. Emily stepped out into the cold air, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The dog trotted beside her, its movements silent but purposeful, as if it too knew what had to be done. The path ahead was unclear, but the sense of urgency and determination propelled her forward. As she made her way back through the woods, the same trail she had followed when she first arrived, she felt a strange shift in the air. It was as though the forest itself was watching, listening. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig beneath her feet, seemed amplified in the quiet. But there was no turning back now. She had to finish what Lily had started. The night grew darker as she pressed on, the familiar cabin now far behind her. Then, in the distance, she saw it, an old, crumbling stone structure barely visible through the trees. It hadn't been there the last time she had walked this way. The dog halted, its body stiff with alertness. Emily's heart raced as she approached the structure. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But something about it felt different. This was it, the last piece. She could feel it in her bones. Taking a deep breath, she entered. The air inside was heavy, thick with dust and the weight of lost history. In the center of the room was a stone pedestal, upon which rested a weathered book. Emily approached it slowly, her fingers trembling as she opened the book. The pages were old, their edges frayed, but the writing was unmistakable, Lily's handwriting. For Mommy. This is the truth. The key to stopping him. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she read the words, her heart swelling with grief and understanding. She had known all along that Lily was special, but she had never imagined how deeply her daughter had been connected to this place, this dark secret. Lily had known the danger. She had known that one day, Emily would have to face it alone. Suddenly, the air shifted, and the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. She turned to see the figure, the man who had been haunting her every step, who had been waiting for her to find this moment. His eyes were cold, unblinking, and his lips curled into a thin smile. "You should have stayed away," he said, his voice a low whisper that seemed to resonate in the very walls. But Emily didn't flinch. She had found the last piece. She had the truth. And now, with a single, steady motion, she opened the book to the final page. The words glowed, and a blinding light filled the room, forcing the man to step back in terror. "No," he hissed, his form flickering like a shadow. "This can't be, not yet." But it was too late. The light intensified, engulfing everything around her, washing away the dark presence that had lingered for so long. The man screamed, his figure disintegrating into nothingness as the light consumed him. When the light finally faded, Emily found herself standing alone in the stone room. The air was still. The weight had lifted. The dog, ever faithful, stood beside her, its presence grounding her in the aftermath. Emily looked down at the book, the pages now blank. Lily's message had been fulfilled. The last piece had been found. And with it, the truth had been set free. It was over. Lily's spirit, once trapped in the shadows, was finally at peace. And Emily, though scarred, had emerged stronger, knowing that no matter what, she would always carry her daughter's love and the strength to face whatever came next.